Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Christina O'Malley. This is Better Science Teaching, and science fair is my jam. Okay. So I think one of the most exciting things that's happened in the wake of our coronavirus massive school closing situation is that the week that we were finding out everything was getting canceled, Science Olympiad got canceled, a bunch of other competitions my students had been registered for were canceled. The one super cool thing that happened is the Ohio Academy of Science figured out how to make our district and state science days all online. So these events are still gonna happen. I'm so excited about this. They deserve all of the gold stars and happy face emoticons and anything that you can send them for doing this, because they managed to take a program that thousands of students are involved in and keep it up and running, even when we can't get together and talk about what we've done, which I'm just so grateful for them, because all us teachers, our students, parents, people across the state have put so much time and effort into these projects, and students are still gonna have the opportunity to submit them, to get scores, get special awards. All that stuff is still gonna happen. And today we've got finally the instructions and the rubrics for what that's going to look like. And so I wanted to create a video so that I could talk about those things with my students and with anybody else who needed that information about what they should expect to see with these things. So without further ado, if you're in the state of Ohio, you're familiar with the way that these things normally go. So our district and state science days are run by the Junior Academy Council and of the Ohio Academy of Science. And a lot of the upfront things that students see and teachers see is registering using a program called STEMwizard. I know Patrick Becca and his staff have been working really hard at reconfiguring their online programs and their databases and their access points so that those online programs work properly for students, for judges, for fair directors, for all those people who need to be able to access the same information simultaneously. And this looks like we have a really good vision now of what the Junior Academy Council wants to see from our students. So we're going to this great new online format. It's all going to be done through STEMwizard. So everybody's already registered for their district science days, so you're just going to go back into that same portal and upload new information. And the way that that's going to look is that you're going to have new milestones in STEMwizard, just like, updating your information is a milestone, putting your forms in is a milestone. There's going to be some new milestones. And I'm going to go through those in just a minute. But generally, they're going to be a set of questions about your project that the judges are going to have access to, and you're going to fill those in sort of in an essay format, just like filling out a Google form. There's going to be project poster photos that you have to upload. So, normally the judges would stand and look at your display, but this year what's going to happen is you're going to put pictures of those up online. You're also going to upload a project presentation video and a final report. My students have a final report, so that shouldn't be a problem for them. Hopefully you already have one too. So we'll just go through what the Junior Academy Council is looking for to send to judges. Firstly, I want to start with what's on the report card. The report card isn't really different than other years. It just has a few things highlighted on it. Section 1 is going to be oral, written, and visual communications. This is your ability to communicate your ideas with the judges. And this is really important because your communication with them is going to be the key for them understanding what you did and what the important parts of your project are. So that's something that if your communication is poor, you may score poorly in other parts of the rubric where, you really did everything correctly. You just didn't communicate it well. So pay attention to your communication. It's helpful sometimes to run things by other people to make sure you're communicating them properly. So I used to try to find people who, were capable humans. Find people who live in your house, or, send your video to a friend and say, like, hey, what do you think of this video? Does it communicate my ideas well? And see what questions they have. And if they have questions you might want to change, the way that you're presenting yourself to your judges. You want to make sure that for your communication, that you make sure that you've got oral, written, and visual communication all covered. For written, that's going to mean your research report. Did you make sure that you communicated all your background, your question, your hypothesis, your experimental design procedures, data analysis? It's a lot of information. But your research report is a place where you can put that and a judge can sit and read it. This isn't a report where you want to focus on a set number of words. You want to say the thing that needs to be said and then get out, because I'll tell you what, the judges don't want to spend 3 hours judging your report. I suspect it's going to be substantially less time than that. All right, your oral communication, since of course we can't do this face-to-face this year, your oral communication piece is all going to come from the video that you produce. So you're going to want to make sure that you're accurate about what you're saying, you're concise, you say it quickly, and that you explain things in a way that show that you not only understand the terms that you're using, but you can use them correctly and apply them to the research that you did. You're also going to want to make sure that with your oral presentation, you talk about what the limitations of your research are. Like kind of identify where the boundaries are. And one good way to do that is suggest that there are future questions that you'd want to research. And so that could go at the end of your talk. Visually, you want to make sure that you are doing a good job of presenting all your information as best as you can. That includes not only your report, but also the way that you've organized and laid out your board, and that you've made sure that your pictures are very legible and clear and people can read them. I'm a little interested to see how this works out, because I think that it may actually benefit you to have a larger font on your board. Normally I recommend students don't go below about 22 or an 18. You want your board normally to be something that you can read from 3 or 4 feet away and read comfortably. Make sure that it includes not only the prose on your board, your bullet points. If you decide to write a paragraph, put that on there, but also the axes of your graphs and the legends, and that those things are legible to your judge, because you don't want your judges to have to wonder what you're actually saying. You want to make sure that you're clear and that they know what you're saying. You're going to want to make sure that you've everything organized in a reasonable way. Generally, I go on a board the same order that I go on a paper. So you're going to start, I'll find some links or something to put in the notes so you can see some samples. But you're going to want to start with your abstract, your questions, your hypothesis, your experimental design on your left-hand side of your board. And the center is generally a really good spot for data and putting pictures and diagrams of what your experimental design was. And then on the right side, put your conclusions and your discussion and your analysis, and sort of all the post-data stuff goes on that side. All the way down to having any acknowledgments. If you want to acknowledge individual people, you want to stay away from acknowledging companies and universities and that sort of thing. But if you want to acknowledge an individual person, you can, and as well as your works cited. You also want to make sure that your board contains something about photography. So there are rules in the ISEF guidelines about noting where your photographs came from, and you have to make sure that that shows up on your board too. The next part is originality. So for originality, you're going to want to include in your presentation where you got your idea for the project, and there's not always a good place for that in your paper. It may be in your introduction, but in your presentation, that's something that judges ask all the time. Where'd you get the idea for this? If you got your idea from a published source, you're going to want to make sure that you highlight any kind of changes that you made to the suggested project or to the experimental design, because otherwise people are going to say, it's published, that's not novel, it's not new. So originality is something that you can highlight either by describing an original source for your idea, for your project, something that was inspirational that happened, modifications that you made to things that others did, or ways that you analyze data in a new way, or new relationships that you discovered while you were doing something that maybe is a more common project. Some kind of special insight, anything that you can highlight that makes your project new, different than what everyone else has done. That's what judges are looking for originality. Section 3 is your experimental design. There's a lot of stuff here. So for experimental design, it's important to understand that there's two different kinds of projects. You can do something that's based on the scientific method, or you can be doing something that's based on the engineering design process. If you're a student who's at the point where you're thinking about, okay, how am I going to do my online district science day? You probably know which group you're in already. Generally, a scientific project includes a question and a hypothesis and a traditional experiment where you're changing some variables and looking for the relationship between two things. Whereas an engineering design tends to focus more on, I've identified that there is a problem and I need to build a thing. Usually it's build a thing, create something to solve that problem. So I'm going to start first about a scientific experiment. So with that, you need to make sure that your project addresses a clear problem or question and make sure that you state that. It's not going to take you a lot of time to do. You can gesture to your board and state your project, or state what your question was, and identify your hypothesis. This is a really good point too, to mention something that you identified in your literature search. So mention what your question is, and then say, to look for an answer to this, I did a literature search and I saw that scientists had found blah, 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 whatever it is. And so your hypothesis should be blah, 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 right? Because that's what we do. We build science based on what others have done. That's a good place to drop that in there. That will lean towards the next section, which is depth of understanding, which is how much research did you do and how well do you understand the problem and your analysis of your data. But we'll go back to experimental design. You're going to want to make sure that you demonstrate by the way that you're talking about your research that the experiment that you did is designed to answer the question that you asked. There's a lot of science fair projects where students will ask a question and then their experiment doesn't really answer that. Don't fall into that trap. Make sure that you demonstrate how your experiment answers the question that you posed. You also need to make sure that you have a data collection methodology that's very clear. So, that you're recording, I changed this variable, and so this happened, and I recorded it here. So you need to make sure that you make a clear statement about what data you were collecting, why you were collecting it, how it ties into your experimental design, and how it's going to answer that question at the beginning. And you want to make sure that you don't conflate the terms constant, control, and variable. So a constant is something that might impact your experiment, but you're not really doing anything about it. One thing that's frequently constant is room temperature, right? We have thermostats in our house, we set them, we don't really worry about it. It happens a lot with plant projects is, homes will have a constant temperature, but we're not doing something to make sure that it's definitely the same. So in my house, I have different windows that different plants prefer because of things like light, but I'm not really controlling them for temperature. If it's a window that has a lot of sunlight coming in, it's going to be hotter there than some of my other windows in my house. So I'm not really going out of my way to deal with that. They're just, the plants live in my house. If I went out of my way to make sure that the ones in cool spots had heaters that came on at a specific time, then I would be controlling for temperature. I'm actually going out of my way to make sure that stays constant. And I'm not just saying like, a little bit of variability is okay, but it's probably fine. And then lastly, variables. Those are things that are changing, and there's two kinds. One is independent variables. The other one is dependent variables. The independent variable is the one that you are intentionally changing to answer your question. So you're going to change it and see what happens. And the thing that is happening as a result of that is your dependent variable, because the outcome depends on what's happening with your independent variable. So that's when I've heard students kind of mess up with a little bit. And that always goes back to their experimental design and how well they understand the scientific method. You want to make sure that your data is reproducible. You don't want to be like, I just did it one time and that's it. It is what it is. If you have that attitude about your data, that's going to probably mark you down on experimental design. You want to have data that's repeatable and that you have repeated. So you want something that, you want a data set that's robust enough that you can actually make a statement about how often something is going to happen. And then is something that if you just handed it off to another scientist, that they would be able to get a similar relationship as what you found. If not, tell us why. You need to make sure that your data are properly analyzed. With this one, I think that the biggest thing is that sometimes students don't really think about statistics and what statistical things mean. And the biggest issue I've seen is when a judge will say, well, are your results significant? And what they're asking isn't an opinion question. They're asking a statistics question. They want to know, one, if you know what that question means, and two, did you do the analysis? So consider, if you can, finding a way to see if your data is statistically significant. So that's going to involve some kind of statistical test that you have to do with your data, and that varies a lot depending on what kind of data you have. So that's a good thing to do a different search on. I'm not going to go into it with this video, but that can be a really helpful thing to bring up. If you did do the analysis, make sure that you talk about it because it's specifically listed in the rubric. Did you properly analyze your data? For many students, especially lower grades, doing something like an average or a mean is a completely valid and completely appropriate standard of statistics for them. If you're a junior or senior in high school, you should at least be considering doing statistics with your data. You want to make sure too, the last step that's listed here is that you reached valid conclusions. Do your conclusions actually make sense? You want to make sure too that you tie your conclusions back to both your hypothesis that was based on scientific literature, and did you answer your question? Because that's what I would be listening for as a judge. Did this student go through this whole process and then answer their question at the end and make a clear statement about that? It might even be a good spot to remind your judges what your question was by repeating it. Check my notes. The last section number 4, is depth of understanding. This isn't really something that you can really add as a section of your presentation. You can't just say, I understand all things. Yeah. Judges are going to have a sense for that based on how you speak about things. What they're looking for is, did you do adequate background research or literature search for your grade level? Again, for upper level students, I really do think that means scientific journals. Did you go on Google Scholar and find recent articles that scientists published that are related to what you did? For younger kids, 5th and 6th graders, that's generally not accessible to them, not something that would even occur to them to do. So normally for younger kids, it's going to be things like, what kind of books did you look up? Were you looking at elementary books? Were you trying to go a little bit out of your comfort zone and do things like maybe a textbook? I would consider that advanced for a 5th or 6th grader. What kinds of things are you reading to get information from? You have to be kind of careful if your works cited that you either put on your board or in your research paper is web-based. If you are using the internet to find research articles, that's fine. That's totally valid. As a researcher, that's what I've done. You want to make sure that you list them as journals, of course. I worry a little bit more when I see students using websites that are there just for fun, that don't have a lot of scientific content. And I'm familiar with some of them, but I think the judges might kind of have trouble with them. So be careful if you have too many that don't sound serious. So you want to make sure that you have some sources that are listed that sound like they're educational, or they're from a university, or they're from a government agency, the EPA or the Department of the Interior, or Department of Energy, one of those government sources. Let's see. one section of this rubric says that you supplement your answers with relevant information reflecting knowledge gained during the project. That includes two things. One is your literature search. The other thing is your own data. So it's okay to talk about your conclusions and the things that you learned and refer back to the data that you collected. That's one thing that sometimes students kind of don't forget to integrate into their project, is that they can actually learn from the actual science part of their project and not just the literature search part of their project. So make sure that you tie back to that. Make sure that you use terms and principles correctly and that you spell them correctly, especially if they are in the words that you were typing for the judges or things like your file names and your sites. You want to make sure that all those things are as accurate as you can make them. Also in depth of understanding, they're looking for an age-appropriate exploration of science and the subject, how deep you went into it, or how sophisticated your project is. I'm not going to try to give examples because I probably guessed the wrong ones, but you want to make sure that you're doing something that's appropriate. If you're a 12th grader, you want to do a 12th grade project and not something that a student would do in elementary school. I'm just gonna leave it at that because I'll get myself in trouble. Okay, so that's going over the rubric. I'll put a link below so that you can find it. This is available online. It is different than what we're used to in the state of Ohio. Normally in the state of Ohio, we have multiple different rubrics at this point. We have one for scientific method projects, one for engineering projects, one for team projects, and all this stuff is gone. There's no team scoring this year. That section has been eliminated completely, and we're just using one. See how it says all projects, one card. I do want to say a few things about engineering type projects. So with engineering projects, what I think is really important and goes over really well with judges is if you state your problem, and then rather than a hypothesis, give engineering goals. So you're going to want to give a full list of, here are all the things that I need my solution to include, and I would make them measurable. So if you need to have a vehicle, you want us to say, how far is it going to go? How fast is it going to go? What kind of power source is it going to have? How many passengers can it carry? Think about everything that you can count about that solution. And then every prototype you build, you're going to measure against that standard. So you're going to have this whole list of goals and then say prototype one did this, 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 this. And then at the end of that, what you want to talk about with your judges, because you're doing a cycle here with engineering. You start with something, you do a prototype, you test your prototype, and then you analyze if your prototype met your goals. If it didn't meet your goals, you're going to go around again, right? So at that point, you have to decide, what changes am I going to make to my prototype so that the next time I test that I do better? That's really important because that's where you're going to talk about novel solutions with your judges. That's really meaningful. So you want to make sure you include those, and then you're going to have prototype 2, right? You make some changes, you rebuild, get some new materials, whatever, and then you're going to retest it. And that's your data that you're collecting. You're collecting data about how your prototypes are measuring up against your goals, so that when you get to the end, you can make conclusions about how you solved that problem and what your best solution for it is. It's some people like those more than others, but that's a really good way to demonstrate, one, that you understand engineering design processes, two, that you have a project that's original because probably nobody's done it the same way you have before, that you have demonstrated engineering design very clearly because you're talking about walking through the cycle with the judges, and then at the end you're talking about how well you understand the problem and the solution, and if it's practical. Another good thing to add at the end too with that sort of thing is if it's like, do a cost analysis. Is this a feasible solution based on other alternates that are on the market, and could you outcompete them in a business sense? So, all right, next I want to talk about that's the rubric. So we just went through what the rubric thing is. Now we're going to talk about those new milestones that are going to be in STEMwizard. So what we're expecting is there's firstly going to be something that's called, you're going to enter some, okay, so background. Because in the prior sections, you have personal information in there. You have your name, your grade, your address, your parents' names, email, all this stuff. Judges are not going to be able to see any of that. We don't want them to see it. We want to maintain student privacy, which means in the stuff that you're presenting, you're generally not going to be putting things in front of the judges that has your name on it. None of these things require your name. You probably shouldn't use your name. That's going to be something that the directors know, and they're going to match you up to a judge. Judges, when they register, have to say they have to give names of students that they know that they can't be matched with. So if you know someone who's judging, the fair directors already know which students shouldn't be matched with which judges. They already know that information. So you're not going to include your name on anything here because you want to maintain your anonymity. You want to be judged just on the merits of your project. You don't want to have someone have an issue with bias. You don't want to have somebody knowing information about you that they shouldn't know. So the first thing is you're asked for your project title, individual or team, grade, type, and preferred judging category. None of that is identifiable information. That's just information to figure out who to match you with and to set expectations for the judges. The next section is project questions. So the first thing that you're going to need to do is put your abstract in the milestone. Your abstract should include your purpose, procedure, results, conclusion. Should probably be no more than 250 words. It just shouldn't. If you're one of my students, email me. I'll help you make it shorter. So your abstract, purpose, procedure, results, conclusion, 250 words. And that abstract should not have your name on it, and it should not have your school on it. No name, no school. Then there's a questionnaire. One is, where did you get your idea? This is tying back to the originality on the rubric. You want to say where you got your idea from. What I usually tell my students is if you say that your idea came out of a book about science fair projects, that's not a good spot for your idea to come from. Just don't. What you want to do is talk about either a personal experience that led you to being interested in that topic. You want to talk about what got you excited about it. You want to talk about where you got the ideas for your experimental design. A really good, scientifically valid answer is, I did this literature search and found that these are the things that other scientists did. And talk about those. And how you figured out how to do your analysis. Again, it's good to look at other studies that are in the same field and see what kind of techniques they use. But you may be doing something outside of the box, and that's your new and exciting twist. Then make sure that you talk about that in that space there on the questionnaire. Based on the question above, did you modify the idea? This, again, is a question that's asking you to describe things about your project that are new, a new application, a new question that's being asked, a modification to prior work that scientists have done. That's where you want to talk about those things. The question, what interests you about this project, when I read it, what I would want to see is, why are you excited about this? Like, what is it about this that really interests you? Why do you want to talk to me about it? That's where that's headed. Like, what is the really cool thing about this that appeals to you? Next question. What question are you trying to answer, and how did you decide going about answering it? This is where you state your question and what your experimental design is. So what is your question? Just state your question, and then tell me what experiment you're going to do that tells me what the answer to that question is. What data how are you going to produce your data? Don't tell me about your data, but how are you going to get your data? What did you learn from the data is the next question. So that's where you want to say, what are the relationships that you identified? It's not asking you to upload your data, right? That's why you have your paper there and your board. This is asking you, what relationship did you find after you collected your data? What did you learn about the science behind your project before and during the experiment? So this is my read on this is it's asking, why do you think your data shows that relationship? What do you understand about this problem that demonstrates that your data is either in line or not in line with other data that's already out there? Are you in consensus with other scientists? Why or why not? What does your research tell you? Your research, not only your data collection, but also your literature search. And then it says, if engineering design, what design problem are you trying to address, and how did you go about addressing it? So this is your state your problem, list your goals, and what's your strategy? How are you going to do this? So where the scientific method question is asking you your question and your experimental design, this question is asking for your problem statement and your list of goals. Then next, if engineering design, what did you learn about engineering and previous designs for your project before and during the process? So what informed your goal making? How did you decide what things should be goals, and how did you identify that problem that you had? Now, that's the first milestone, the questionnaire. Next, project poster. All right, there's space on this chart where there's going to be 3 pictures. You got 3 uploads, you got 3 pictures, and they're very specific. You got your left panel, your center panel, your right panel. You have to make sure your pictures are clear, that when they're blown up the size of a computer screen, that you can read them. You don't want to have your judges having to blow these up to read them, right? Maybe, I don't know, a click or 2, but if I'm your judge and it's super tiny and I can't read it, I'm going to get really frustrated really quickly, and that's going to cause 2 things. 1, I'm going to get frustrated really quickly and quit trying to look at your board, which you don't want somebody to do. You want them to be comfortable enough looking at it that they're going to keep looking at it, right? So you need to make sure that it's focused, that it's easy to read, and that it shows the whole panel. Don't be afraid to let there be an edge on your board. Just make sure that they know that the whole thing is there. One's gonna be left, the center, the right. You're gonna need to make sure that you have the little, the picture, what's it called? The photo release form. You're also gonna need to make sure that you don't have any logos or branding on your board. That's an ISEF violation. Don't do it. You also may want to double check and make sure that you don't have living things, samples of stuff. We're not presenting in person, so that the safety rules are kind of, I'm not sure, I don't know how they're going to react with those. But there are safety rules, and you want to make sure that you're following them. So that's the second milestone, your project poster. The third one, your project presentation video. This is the one that I think is going to require the most time and the most thought. The basic idea of this is that you are going to shoot a video of yourself talking about your project. And this is going to validate the idea that you did your project. So, if you have to practice a few times, that's fine. If you need to do a few takes, that's fine. What you are not allowed to do is edit it. So judges are going to be asked to commit to watching 8 minutes of your video. If it takes more than 8 minutes, upload the whole thing. People might watch another 30 seconds or another couple of minutes. You can't make it twice that long, for sure. So if you feel like you absolutely have to keep 8:30, okay. But the truth is that the judges are under no obligation to watch after 8 minutes. So you want to pack in as much as you can and hit all these rubric points. You can go back and watch the earlier part of the video in those first 8 minutes. And it's just tricky because you can't edit it, you can't cut it, you can't splice it together. Don't speed it up. This is something that a lot of teachers are familiar with because it's part of what we do for licensure, is we record ourselves teaching a class. I've done it for other courses that I've taken as a graduate student. So, every once in a while my students will come in and they'll be like, wait, there's a camera over there. I'll be like, I know, I'm in a class, guys. So if you're having trouble with this, your teacher might be a really good person to talk to because we kind of deal with this. No editing. So the trick with editing is, what do you do if you make a mistake? You have a couple of options. One, keep the mistake. Just leave it in there. You're human. It's fine. It's fine. Unless it really throws you off. If it really throws you off, you have to start over. It's an 8-minute video. It's not that long, right? Then it takes you 16 minutes instead of 8 minutes. But you'll make a better video, and you might feel more proud about that. One thing that I like to do when I'm required to do videotaping is I will shoot way more times than I have to. So, there was one task for licensure where I had to record myself teaching a class. I shot myself on 3 classes. So then I could go back and watch those and choose the one that I thought was the best and that did the best job of hitting the points on the rubric for that license. So those are some options that you have. When you shoot your video, you're going to want to test it first. So get your camera, figure out how you're going to prop it up, test it, and then watch it. Make sure your sound works, make sure your lighting is good, make sure that you like the way that it looks. It's recommended, oh, by the way, I've been shooting these with my iPhone. So phone camera works great because you can access STEMwizard with your iPhone. You can access YouTube with your iPhone and to upload your video. You can do everything within your iPhone. So that's really pretty handy. If you don't have one, you may be able to borrow one from someone, which is harder because we're not supposed to go and talk to each other and it's a phone. But yeah, if you're my student, you have trouble with recording, let me know. We'll come up with something. But you're going to want to make sure that you test things up. I recommend too that you don't have a window behind you. Stand with your window in front of you and get natural light that way. You're also going to want to set up your space when you do your presentation so that your board is behind you. That's actually in the requirements here. It says we need to see you and your board. It's not listed, but also make sure you put all of your stuff, like make it look like it would look at a science fair project. Put your table on, or put your board on a table, put your report there, put your logbook there, all the things that would normally be at your display. You want your judges to, get the sense that it's at a science fair. You can set that up because you have it. It also hides all your stuff. So like you guys can see my sewing table sometimes in my closet. But you'll put your board behind you and stand in front of your board and talk. Make sure you dress nice too, kids. Okay. So camera's gonna work great. My recommendation is that you prop up your phone rather than having someone hold it. The reason for that is because people, even if they're trying to be really still, are still gonna jiggle your phone and just don't. So if you have a tripod, like I bought a tripod for like $15, but just stack up some books and prop up your phone so that it stands up there. Get a sock and fill it with rice and then just nestle it in there. That's another thing you can do. But there are tricks to being able to set up your phone so that it stays still while you're talking to it. And then you don't even have to necessarily have another person. One idea that you can have that Mrs. McMurray demonstrated in one of the videos that I'll also link below was having somebody ask you questions just off screen. So that would be an okay thing to do too. You aren't allowed to edit this. So that means that you can't include PowerPoint. You can't put PowerPoint slide. You can't cut your video and put a PowerPoint slide up. You can't voice over anything. This is intentional, no edit footage. So you can't mess with any of that stuff. It just has to be a single take, a single shot, and you have to then take that and upload it to YouTube. Some things that you don't want to do. Don't say your name. Don't say your school. Don't say your name. Don't say your school. You can say hello. I'm going to tell you about my project. Blah, 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 project title. That's a good way to open. You'll just get in and it'll feel fine. I know sometimes it feels weird to not start with some kind of intro, but just say, hi, thank you for judging my science fair project. I studied blah, blah, blah. You don't need to introduce yourself. And that gives us an extra level of anonymity for students, which is nice. Okay, so that's what we got about the video portion of this. Lastly, you need to have a project final report. For your final report, make sure you don't have your name and your school attached. What you're uploading in this milestone is information for the judges. The judges should not be seeing that information. It is attached to your submission in other parts. The fair director will know who you are. That's fine. Don't put your name and your school with the report that you upload. You need to make sure that your report includes a title, a statement of your problem or question, your background research. So in my class, we call that introduction. A hypothesis, or engineering design gives a design statement, a step-by-step procedure with materials and equipment. So that's basically your research plan, right? We're taking our research plan and sticking that as part of a report. And then we're including our data collected, which is not normally part of a research plan. Our data collected, including our tables, graphs, and charts, including a discussion of results and conclusions, and a works cited or references page. The final report is basically, it says in here, a research plan with data, results, and conclusions. Do not include your name or school district name. None of that information. We don't want to be able to identify who you are from your research report. That has to be uploaded as a PDF. That's something that you should know how to do, or your teacher can help you with if you're having trouble with it. And that's the last thing. So I'm really excited about this. For those of you out there who are teachers, this is a huge undertaking that the district chair people have taken on. And so what I would encourage you to do, even if you haven't done it in the past, or maybe even people who don't live in Ohio, if you used to live in Ohio and you love Ohio schools and you love our science fair program, this is an opportunity for people who are more remote to volunteer to judge. I think that this is going to be important more than ever, that we have enough manpower to get through all this, because we're going to have a whole lot of kids that are coming into a whole lot of districts, and they're going to need people to go through their submissions and give students feedback and help the Ohio Academy of Science figure this out. So I know that I'm gonna register to judge, and I'm probably gonna stick to 2 districts, the district that I live in, and then I have another district that I kind of feel like I have a relationship with because I've judged for them a few times, and so I'll probably register to judge for them too, which means I'll have to do double duty, but that's fine because I put students into this, and I am so grateful to the Ohio Academy of Science for putting this together for our kids. This was the one thing, and I was so delighted that the Ohio Academy of Science said, yeah, we'll make this work. We can figure this out. And it's not happening on the same timeline that it used to, but this is going to be okay. There's also going to be more information coming out about State Science Day, and I believe they're trying to come up with a solution for Buckeye Science Fair as well. I'm not really sure what's going on with that. But I'm really excited, because with so many things being canceled for our kids who, as our school calls them, nerd sports, Science Olympiad, Science Fair, Junior Science Humanities Symposium, presenting at our annual meeting, all those things were gone, but Science Fair is still going to run. So I'm really pumped about that. Science Fair is my jam. All right. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. Feel free to let me know, give me comments. If you guys have questions or other things you want me to find answers to, I'm happy to go digging for them. I hope that you stay safe and stay well and make good choices. I'll talk to you soon.